Welcome to the Quoc and Roll podcast. I am your host, Quoc Pui Lan. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the institutional, sociological, and historical study of women in world Christianity. Joining me today is Dr. Gina Zurlo, who teaches at Harvard Divinity School. Welcome to the podcast, Gina.
Thanks so much for having me.
You published this pioneering book, Women in World Christianity. Can you tell us what are the major findings and themes of your book?
Sure. This book was a really important book for me, personally, as a woman in world Christianity, but also professionally, as the person who inherited this quantitative tradition in world Christianity studies. And when I inherited the World Christian Database tradition, I noticed pretty quickly that there was not a gender element in the database. There was no gender variable. And I was getting asked a lot of questions about what is the share of women in world Christianity, and I wasn't really able to answer the question. So I embarked on a research study to answer that question from a demographic perspective of how many women are in world Christianity. Does the gender makeup differ based on Christian tradition or geographic location? And the project grew and grew out of this sociological question into the book, Women in World Christianity. And the reason it's interdisciplinary between social sciences and history is because it really reflects who I am as a scholar. I really think in order for us to understand current trends and where we're going in the future, we have to have an understanding of the past. So I'm really proud of this book, and I'm really glad that it takes that interdisciplinary perspective for students and scholars to really get a sense of what we know about women in the past, what we know about the challenges and opportunities that women have now, so that we can make good decisions for the future about women in world Christianity.
You mentioned that you use quantitative research in this book and also in your other studies. Why is this approach important, and how this approach may add to our knowledge of world Christianity?
So numbers and counting actually has a really important role in the history of Christianity. Some of the first censuses in the world were actually started by churches. Churches were the first to count how many people through baptism lived in a village or town or city or country. And then the tradition grew through missionary work. We have the Vatican, for example, has a really strong quantitative tradition. So Christians have always counted themselves. And the tradition that I'm a part of is counting Christianity and other world religions in every country of the world, and then Christianity down to the denominational level. And the purpose of this work is to give that big picture framework of what is happening in world Christianity, past, present, and future. So this major finding, for example, in world Christianity studies of the demographic shift of Christianity to the global south comes from the World Christian Database tradition. And arguably, the field of world Christianity exists because of the demographic shift of Christianity from global north to global south that my predecessor, David Barrett, uncovered in the 1960s and 70s. So I think we need quantitative approaches to give us that big picture perspective and to give us some indications of what we should be studying on the local level, where Christianity is growing, where it is declining, where it's being challenged, where religious diversity is increasing, etc. So this is why I like quantitative studies, because it's asking big questions and it's really truly global. The World Christian Database studies Christianity in every single country of the world. And that's what makes it a really exciting project.
Indeed, I have used the database and find it very helpful. Can you also talk about the drawbacks of this research? For example, when you talk about in the United States, there are so many Christians, but they may not be practicing. How do you count them? Can you talk about some of these very tricky issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the demography of religion, there are many different ways to study religiosity. The way of the World Christian Database is to study membership and affiliation, because David Barrett, the founder of this tradition, found that membership and affiliation was the only variable that you could really study in every single country of the world. But that is, as you say, only one dynamic of religion worldwide. Who is a member of a church? It says absolutely nothing about who's showing up on Sunday morning, about their levels of engagement or their giving or anything. So then we have this whole other tradition in the sociology of religion of survey work. And surveys, which are self-report measures, are much better at getting at the realities on the ground, so to speak, of who's attending church, who considers religion important in their life, who believes in God, who tithes, all these different belief and practices kinds of variables. So what we can do is we can do comparisons between the membership and affiliation data and these self-report measures and surveys to see where the gap is. So there are a lot of places around the world where membership is really high, such as in Western Europe, but beliefs and practices are really low. So in Western Europe, a lot of people are baptized Catholics still, and so they're counted on the rolls of Catholic churches. So membership appears to be quite high. But we regularly see from the survey work that belief in God variables, and especially church attendance variables, are super low. We're talking single digits, maybe 4 or 5% of people who self-identify as Christians are actually going to church. So that reveals a lot from quantitative perspectives about what's going on in the world.
Can you tell us how do you gather those data? That is, why would you be able to get data from all the countries in the world? Why would either, if they are self-reporting, share their data with you? Can you talk about the process a little bit?
This is the benefit of a very long research tradition. So David Barrett was doing his work in the 1960s from Nairobi. So this tradition has been built up for many decades. I think it would be extremely difficult, maybe impossible, to start from scratch today in this kind of work, because the World Christian Database tradition has earned a level of trust around the world that people are more willing to give their data. So there are a few major sources of data in the demography of religion. The first is government censuses. About half of the world's countries ask a religion question on their census, and generally censuses are held every 10 years or so. And for many sociologists, this is the gold standard data. This is how you know what's happening in a country. But as I said, only about half of the world's countries ask a religion question. So what do you do if they don't ask a religion question? So the next source of data are those social scientific surveys and polls. And there are all kinds of surveys at the global level, regional level, national level, local levels. And a lot of them do ask questions about religion. So this includes the International Social Survey Program, the World Value Survey, the European Social Survey, Afrobarometer, and surveys such as those from the Pew Research Center, which are excellent. So that can get at another source of data. So most social scientists use those two sources of data. What makes the World Christian Database a little bit different is this third source of data, which is data from religious communities themselves. And this is part of the method that David Barrett really pioneered, which was melding together, quote, secular data, such as those from censuses and surveys, and, quote, religious data from religious communities themselves. So he traveled to 212 countries looking for this on-the-ground data. And he put those data from churches themselves and networks and denominations into conversation and triangulated many different kinds of data sources to come up with his own best estimates for the size of Christianity and every other religion in every country of the world. And this is a method that we still use today in the World Christian Database. Now, it does produce some conflicting data because often what is reported on a census might not be what Christians on the ground say about the size of their own community. A classic example of this is India. So the Indian census consistently says that Christians are 2% of the Indian population, but Christian communities on the ground have said upwards of 8 or 10%. Now, India has 1.4 billion people. So a discrepancy like that, we're talking a lot of people. So we regularly talk to Indian Christian leaders on the ground, and we're collecting all different kinds of information possible to do that triangulation work to figure out what we think the situation is.
Gina, can you tell us what prompted you to participate in this kind of work? I know that there are not many women involved.
That is true. And I think the lack of women involved is one of the reasons why there was no gender variable in the World Christian database, and very little mention of women in the first two editions of the World Christian Encyclopedia. So I really ended up in this work by accident. I had no idea what the demography of religion is. I don't think many little girls say, I want to be a demographer of religion when I grow up. But I was always a globally oriented person, always interested in other cultures and people and what was going on around the world. And so I stumbled upon the Center for the Study of Global Christianity and the World Christian Database Project. And my mentor, Todd Johnson, had given a lecture of all the maps, charts, graphs, and trends in world Christianity. And I was just instantly hooked the first time I ever saw it. So I started working on the database then, and I never looked back. I've been working on this project since I was 21 years old, and I'm excited to take it to the next generation in the future.
We are very glad that you were excited, and that is why we have this book, Women in World Christianity. When you put together that book, do you also mine the data from the World Christian data book, or you have to do other kinds of research yourself?
That went into this book, like all good research projects, I went into the project thinking I would do one thing and then very quickly realized that thing was not quite possible. So this book came after the publication of the World Christian Encyclopedia, 3rd edition. Now, the World Christian Encyclopedia has the history and demographics of Christianity in every country of the world, past, present, and future. So we had just come off of 5 years of updating all of the statistics for every country for the encyclopedia. And when I had the idea for this Women in World Christianity project, I said, I'll just go back to all of the data that we collected for the encyclopedia project, and I'll reanalyze it through this new gender lens. But the problem was when I went back to those data to reanalyze it through a gendered lens, there was no gender lens to reanalyze it with. I was looking at all kinds of denominational reports and statistics from religious communities on the ground, and so few of them had a gender variable. And this was surprising to me because, as I said before, there's a very strong quantitative tradition in churches around the world. And we collect these denominational reports that have all kinds of stats. How many buildings, how many pastors, what are the budgets, what is the tithing, how many baptisms, how many outreach, everything is quantified. And I'd get these really supposedly comprehensive reports, and it wouldn't say anything about women. It wouldn't say anything about what % of the membership is women. And I thought this was really surprising. And I talked to a historian friend of mine about this, who had done a lot of work in archives of mainline denominations and had done work in women's history. And I said, why do you think this is? For all these church traditions that do all this counting, why are they not reporting anything about gender? And she goes, because they know that all of their churches are majority women and they don't want to admit it. And this really took me back, honestly, to hear her say this, because it's true. I think a lot of people are aware, even just anecdotally, that world Christianity is, quote, a women's movement, in the words of Dana Robert, that more women are attending churches than men. And so my historian friend was saying that it was a purposeful omission in these reports to not put it out there so publicly that their churches were made of women because they were ashamed of it. So that really just got me going with this project, because if women are doing all of the work and getting none of the credit or none of the recognition or even acknowledgement of their existence, we still have a lot of work to do.
Can you tell us why you divide your book into 3 sections?
So the 3 sections of the book are the first section on a continental perspective. So women in Christianity in Asia, Africa, Latin America, etc. The second section is by what we call major Christian tradition. So it's a chapter each on women in Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Protestantism, etc. And then the third section is topical. So select topics that I thought were important for inclusion in the book, such as women in theological education, women in ecological activism, etc. And the reason the book is structured this way is because this is the way I teach, honestly. When I teach world Christianity, I take this 3-pronged approach in my attempt to be really comprehensive in terms of world Christianity, that we're talking about all of the Christians all around the world in all different kinds of theological traditions. because I had taught a class on women in world Christianity. And that's when I realized that a textbook like this was missing. I was pulling information from all different kinds of sources to build a class out with this 3-part structure. And that was one of the prompts for writing the book, was so that next time I taught a world Christianity class, I would have a textbook all about women, and for anyone else as well. So it's really designed that way to be used in the classroom and paired with some of those more standard world Christianity texts that might not go as deep into the stories of women worldwide.
I want to ask, were there surprises when you were doing this book? That is, new ideas or something that you have not expected?
Yeah, one surprising thing that I think I knew, but really jumped out at me when doing this work was women as boundary crossers. And we hear this a lot in terms of mission studies and the history of mission, really amazing pioneering women missionaries going all around the world, spreading the gospel, medical work, all kinds of things. But the theme just kept coming forward in everything that we were doing. Women were boundary crossing gender roles. They were boundary crossing ethnic divides. They were boundary crossing class divisions. And it just came out as a much bigger theme than I thought in both the history of Christianity and what women are doing today. So that's one theme and one major finding of the book that I hope people pick up when they read is women are really much more likely than men to cross boundaries in order to do the work that they feel called to do.
You mentioned that you found that there were many data about women missing in church records or from Christian organizations. What would be your advice to this organization or churches to preserve those very important data for history?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of churches and Christian organizations take women for granted. They take it for granted that women are going to show up, that they're going to be faithful, that they're going to participate, that they're going to give their free labor, that they're going to volunteer. And so because of that, women are often running everything in the background, whether or not they have public recognition for it. Now, what can churches do to overcome this? We can have more women in public-facing opportunities. We can have more people keeping records of what women are doing in churches, keep good historical records that become archives and people study, etc. But really, when it comes down to it, what we should be doing more is talking to women. And this might sound really basic, but as I travel around the world, talking about this work and talking to church leaders, pastors, mission organization leaders, etc., I just find that women are not being heard. And it's not because they're not speaking, but it's often because people are not asking them what their experiences are. Even in church organizations and mission organizations where women have climbed the ladder, so to speak, or broken that stained glass ceiling, men are not really asking women what those experiences were like to climb that ladder and break that stained glass ceiling. So we need to have more open dialogue between men and women in these organizations. And for those organizations where women are not allowed to have those more public-facing opportunities, we need more men to advocate for women. It's not just a, quote, women's issue for women to climb the ladder on their own. Women need the assistance of men in a lot of cases to help them push through that noise to achieve the thing that they want to do. And in doing that, people will recognize that women are being helped, that women are being heard, and we can keep those records for posterity.
You have been doing research on world Christianity for decades now. What do you see as the emerging trends in the study of world Christianity?
I love the field of world Christianity so much. And the reason I love it so much is because it's a huge field. We're talking about world Christianity all over the place in all these different languages, all these different people groups, all these different socioeconomic conditions, political situations. So it's really exciting to watch this field develop and take on new and exciting areas of research. So one of those areas of research is related to economics. I do think we could go further in this, but I do see people talking more about, for example, missions and money and funding models when it comes to mission, because the old funding models just don't work anymore in light of a majority global South Christianity. So what do we do with this power imbalance in world Christianity where a lot of the money is still in the global north. Most of the Christians are in the global south. So I'm starting to see some conversations happening around that. And I want to encourage anyone listening to keep going and keep pushing the envelope of these economic analyses of world Christianity. And another really interesting section is migration. This is a really hot topic right now, or is the movement of Christians around the world. What does it mean to have all these Nigerian Christians in diaspora? What does it mean that Chinese are more Christian outside of China than they are in mainland China? What does it mean for Brazilians in my region, in Boston, coming from Brazil, coming to the Boston area, working in bivocational ministry? And what does it mean for the establishment of these ethnic minority churches in almost every single major European city now has large populations of Christians from all around the world? This is fundamentally reshaping world Christianity and breaking down that global north, global south dichotomy. So this is a really exciting area of research that I'm seeing a lot of chatter about and I'm watching very closely.
People are talking about AI and its impact on education and on research. Since you are dealing with this large quantitative research, what do you think the impact of AI in mining big data or challenging some of the old assumptions of previous research?
I'm so glad you asked about AI because I think about it every single day, all day long, essentially. And I actually just a few days ago attended a symposium at Harvard University about generative AI and how it's being used in classrooms at Harvard. And honestly, I was completely blown away. The conversations are really exciting, really inspiring, and really challenging. And one major takeaway I had from that symposium was about the creativity that is required to use AI effectively. And the fact that so much of this is purely experimental. And so this is really exciting for me, as you say, as someone who runs a big data project. There's a lot of what we're doing that is frankly manual, time-consuming, tedious data work. And I know that we can harness the power of AI to do this better and more effectively and faster. So this is actually a major project for me in the coming years, is to tap into some of these resources at Harvard and these conversations that are happening to see how we can really maximize what's happening in the generative AI world to increase the efficacy of what we're doing with the World Christian Database. I think there's huge potential there. I just need to partner with the right people to make it work.
Do we need to be retooled in order to harness the power of AI? For example, somebody like you who have a lot of experience already, do you need to learn something new if you were to use AI in your research?
I think so. So I've played around a little bit with the Harvard AI sandbox, just asking it questions about the kind of work that I do. Even just yesterday, I was working on another one of those large scale, tedious data tasks. And I was talking to ChatGPT about how I could do this better or how I could automate this. And I quickly bumped up against my own level of skill when it came to coding and some other different programs. So I am committed to building my own skill set and learning that new vocabulary when it comes to coding in order to create these programs that can at least automate a lot of what we do now. And that was the other thing about the symposium that was so inspiring was people were using generative AI to answer far more complicated questions than how many Christians are in the world. They're trying to figure out what rats think. And it's really incredible what they've been able to find. So if we can use AI to figure out what rats think, I think we can use AI to figure out how many Christians are in the world.
That is excellent. And I can't wait to see some of your research along those lines. And are you working on new projects then? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I have two major projects going on right now. So one project I'm working on is a women's history of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, which was known as EATWAT. EATWAT arose in the 1970s as part of the Third World or non-aligned movement, where theologians from Asia, Africa, Latin America were getting together really for the first time to talk about shared experiences of oppression and how to do theology outside of the Western oppressor. So I'm working with my colleague, Raimundo Barreto, over at Princeton Theological Seminary. We just had a meeting at the archives at Union Theological Seminary a couple of weeks ago, and we're digging into what were the women doing? The women had to have their own eruption in the eruption related to Eatwat because they weren't being taken seriously by the third world theologian men. So we're seeing a lot of these themes of women's history, of erasure and being overlooked, and women having to insert themselves into the conversation. And then we'll tie the history of the women of Eatwat to the emergence of world Christianity studies. Another project I'm working on puts on my social science hat, which is a project on power, violence, and resistance in world Christianity. And my interest in this actually came from my work in women in world Christianity. When you work on women, you have to pay attention to issues related to power. Where do women lack power? Where do they gain power? Soft power, institutional power. Really, studying women is studying power. And that interest in women, tied with these current conversations about Christian nationalism, has led me down this road of thinking more critically and sociologically about Christian relationships to power structures globally. So where do Christians have power? And when they have that kind of power, one, what does it look like? What does it mean to have power? How do they use it? Do they use it for good? Do they use it to advance an agenda? And where they don't have power, are they persecuted? Are they happy minorities? What does it look like? I'll be teaching a class on it at Harvard Divinity School next spring, and hopefully this will turn into another book project.
Would you advise other women to follow your footsteps to study world Christianity quantitatively?
I would love to have more people studying world Christianity quantitatively. It'd be great to have more conversation partners and to look at issues together, especially this work on women in world Christianity. To be honest, it can feel a little lonely when you do this kind of big picture gendered work. There are very few women who take this sociological perspective and are working on the quantitative side. So if you're interested, come join me at the World Christian Database and we can take over the world with data. It would be a lot of fun.
Thank you very much for joining the podcast today. Best wishes for your future project. And if you like the podcast, please comment and subscribe. I will see you in the next episode.